So this is Dr. Ashley Thorpe. And yes, I'm particularly pleased to be introducing Ashley because we've worked together for a little while now. And he also actually recently staged a great performance of Lady Precious Stream at the University of Reading and also at the Archway Chinese Association, is that right? Yeah. Okay, so I don't know, some of you may have made it to see that show there. Thank you. Okay, so Ashley has also written a book called The Role of the Clown in Traditional Chinese Drama. He's currently lecturer in theatre at University of Reading. We also co-organised a conference called Contesting British Chinese Culture, Forms, Histories and Identities last year, which was held at Reading. And Ashley is also currently working on a monograph which is on British Chinese performance in the UK throughout the 20th century.
Thank you. I just need to do my DJing here. Okay. First of all, thanks very much to Anne for organising the series and to both Anne and Diana for inviting me to come. And in discussing this production of Monkey Journey to the West from 2007, I have to admit and confess that the first time I saw it, I really hated it. And I left thinking, how is it possible in the 21st century to create theatre that's this offensive? That was after the Royal Opera House. I left in a right huff. And then a friend persuaded me to go and see it again at the O2. I kind of started to understand it, but I think it fits in very neatly with Simon's paper and Poppy of this kind of double-edged kind of approach to reading performance, which on the one hand might seek to confirm particular stereotypes and particular views of culture, but also at the same time might be able to challenge them. And it's this kind of dual thing which I'm going to explore in the paper. So, in the run-up to the 2008 Beijing Olympics, sorry I mentioned the O word, there was an inevitable increase in the number of theatre productions in Britain seeking, in some sense, to represent or discuss China. And whilst Chinese opera and ballet troupes from mainland China toured the UK, British theatre companies responded with productions including Yellow Earth's Running the Silk Road, 2008 in the Barbican, and Not So Loud Slippery Mountain, which was performed in a restaurant in Chinatown. Yet none of these performances achieved the visibility of Monkey Journey to the West, a newly composed opera that garnered exceptional critical acclaim and realised a run of sold-out performances. Interestingly, this monkey was one of three monkeys on in UK in that year. One was by Colin Tevan, which was in York, and another one took place in the Polka Theatre in Wimbledon. So there's actually a lot of monkeying about around the Chinese Olympics. This production was based on the Chinese vernacular novel Journey to the West, Xiouji, popularly thought to have been written in the Ming Dynasty by Wu Cheng'en. Those of you who don't know the story, in a nutshell, it's a very long novel. A monkey is born from a stone egg, and he immediately decides that being a monkey isn't enough, and that he wants to become a kind of immortal and very important person. So he kind of attains this kind of Taoist kind of power. He achieves immortality, but he kind of gets a bit too big for his boots. And he goes up to Buddha and kind of makes a bet with him, which he loses. Monkey's imprisoned under Buddha's hand for 500 years, and then he's set free, and he has to assist a monk going from China to India to collect these kind of scriptures, which they're going to take back to China. So most of the novel actually is this is the monkey kind of assisting the monk on his journey and beating off various monsters and kind of saving him from all of these kind of terrible ordeals, and then they arrive in Nirvana and they pick up these scriptures and then head home. This production was originally conceived by Chen Shizheng, a Chinese-born classical opera director who emigrated to America in 1987. Chen asked the British musician Damon Albarn and animator Jamie Hewlett to contribute to the music and design for the production. And what I'm really aiming to do with this paper is seek to debate whether this performance proffered nothing more than a commercialized Orientalist stereotype, a kind of stereotypical construction of Chinese culture for the consumption of white British audiences, or actually whether there's something a bit more, if you like, intelligent going on. For those of you who didn't see the performance, I don't know if that's anyone, it was quite difficult to miss, but if you didn't see it, I'm just going to show you a kind of minute-and-a-half show reel so that you get the idea. Basically, the performance was a mixture of kind of Chinese circus, Chinese opera, Western opera, British pop music, and animation. Okay, I just want to talk a little bit about the role of Damon Albarn and Jamie Hewlett in this production, because they'd worked together before, since 1999, as the internationally successful virtual band Gorillaz. And when Gorillaz put on Monkey, there seems to be a connection. The group, Gorillaz, was launched, actually I've gone too far, as a response to the depthless nature of MTV and the manufactured music videos aired on that channel. It can be argued that the creation of a virtual band explicitly seeks to critique forms of manufactured and commercially driven popular culture. Indeed, by appearing as a virtual band, Gorillaz have become bound up with postmodern simulations. In his essay, Symbolic Exchange and Death, Jean Baudrillard outlines how today, where the real and the imaginary are intermixed in one and the same operational totality, aesthetic fascination reigns supreme, with subliminal perception, a sort of sixth sense of special effects, editing and script. Reality is overexposed to the glare of models. A kind of unintentional parody hangs over everything. If contemporary popular culture, especially that espoused by MTV, epitomizes Baudrillard's view of the arts as symptomatic of this kind of hyper-realism, Gorillaz functions to render this view explicit through a series of overt kind of simulations. Gorillaz rarely appear in a non-mediatized form, only as alter egos in animated videos, and even live performances consist of the band appearing as projected, seemingly three-dimensional animations. This reliance on animation rather than live-action film, and as a substitute for personal appearances by the musicians, highlights the extent to which simulations have kind of substituted the real across culture more generally. This critique of the shallow nature of popular culture is reinforced by 2D, an animated member of Gorillaz who is actually voiced by Albarn. Although the character's name is according to the virtual band, due to the character having suffered 2 accidents at the hands of another virtual member of the group, rendering him blind, 2D is actually short for too dense. It's also possible that 2D refers to the two-dimensional simulations of popular culture. Indeed, 2D is depicted with empty black eye sockets and 2 front teeth missing. And this seems to be both a reaction to the depthlessness of simulations, but also a deliberate subversion of the stereotypical good-looking pop star. Given that Gorillaz are also caught up in the same mechanised and economically driven apparatus of popular culture that they apparently seek to deconstruct, can the group be viewed as a critique of postmodern culture, using the prevailing modes of mainstream postmodern culture as a vehicle? Investing art with such critical power goes against arguments made by Baudrillard further on in his essay, where he says, "So art is everywhere, since artifice lies at the heart of reality. So art is dead, since not only is its critical transcendence dead, but reality itself, entirely impregnated by an aesthetic that holds on to its very structurality, has become inseparable from its own image." One could certainly apply this depressing outlook for the arts to the work of Gorillaz, whose ability to cash in on the prevailing modes of simulation is as powerful as any perceived attempt to deconstruct it. That Olburn is a driving force behind Gorillaz is significant. He achieved fame in the 1990s as a central figure of Britpop, a movement that considered itself as independent music and therefore is apparently removed from the usual corporative drive for profit popular music. As a result, whilst Gorillaz attempts to critique the crassness and depthless nature of postmodern simulations, it simultaneously offers a false sense of integrity and truth, which is offered by brand Olburn, a brand that is itself grounded in apparent reaction against commercial pop music, but is still nevertheless a best-selling product of it. Such a dichotomy is difficult to resolve, but Baz Kerschel's writing on radical performance is helpful in mapping a trajectory both for the resolution of this kind of dilemma, but also for this paper as a whole. Kerschel suggests that, and I quote, "If you write about contemporary performance, either you are with the postmodern or you are not," end quote. Eschewing divisive debates, Kerschel argues instead that the great paradigms of postmodernism and modernism are not so much locked in a logical opposition, but instead are intertwined like the lines of an unfinished mandala. For if, as Kerschel suggests, postmodernity is a shifting, as yet fictional historical paradigm in the contemporary period, the influence of which cannot be accurately pinpointed, then a feasible means of gauging cultural change lies in an analysis of the reflexivity of cultural forms, especially where reflexivity signifies the ability of people and sometimes systems to question and or interpret the assumptions informing the social world through which they live. The conception of reflexivity as a tool of critique makes it possible to argue that bands such as Gorillaz, which seem to inhabit the worst excesses of postmodern simulation, might also reflexively critique that simulation by holding up a mirror and exposing all of these things for the engineered mechanisms that they are. As I said, that the founders of Gorillaz should further collaborate on Monkey suggests a possible connection between these two projects. Indeed, given that Olburn and Hewlett are rooted to popular music, the decision to stage the performance at the Royal Opera House bemused some critics who were unsure about how to interpret the production along conventional operatic lines. Yet if Monkey's run at the Royal Opera House sought to engage debate about what form opera should or should not take, the decision to move the show to a purpose-built tent in the grounds of the vast O2 Arena in Greenwich, East London, in November of 2007 further complicated the issue. The choice to stage the performance at the arena, which is primarily used for major pop concerts, marked an explicit attempt to connect the production with mass cultural forms. Indeed, shortly before its run at the O2, Monkey was promoted on the internet via its own YouTube channel, as well as on the contemporary music television show later with Jules Holland. A large portion of the score of Monkey was also performed live on BBC Radio 2 in an hour-long programme in November. In August of that year, the soundtrack was commercially released on CD, shortly followed by a deluxe box edition retailing for £80, from which a single, Monkey Bee, was released and promoted by a Hewlett-designed video. Hewlett also produced a limited edition box, that's not the deluxe one, this is a limited edition one, of numbered lithographic prints of the main characters from the production, which you could pick up for £400. Some merchandise had been available since the production's initial opening in 2007, but by the time of the O2 run, posters, prints, specially designed Oriental fans, T-shirts and even Chinese souvenir tea bags were alongside an array of other merchandise available from the venue and by mail order, of course, from the production website. There is, therefore, a convincing argument that Monkey is little more than a transient simulation that is symptomatic of postmodern popular culture. Yet in the same way that Gorillaz appears to utilise postmodern techniques to reflexively criticise postmodern culture, could the spectacular staging of Monkey work along similar lines? In order to investigate this, it's important to first bear in mind that the original novel by Wu Cheng'en and its storytelling antecedents sought to entertain audiences with increasingly spectacular feats, whilst also detailing stories of the religious pilgrimage to obtain Buddhist scriptures from the West. It's no coincidence that in the novel, the majority of it is about these kind of amazing feats that Monkey does to protect the monk on his journey. The connection between spectacle and religious or moral teaching is, of course, not a new phenomenon. Indeed, the performance of mystery and miracle plays in medieval Europe were famed for their ability to recount biblical stories through spectacular staging techniques. Individual wagons depicting specific biblical scenes were built to include all kinds of stage effects, including smoke, fire, trapdoors, levels, and lifting mechanisms. These dazzling stories, kind of dramatised on these wagons, helped to draw crowds to watch the performance, whilst also advertising the advanced craftsmanship of specific guilds. So this kind of connection between, if you like, capitalism and industrial enterprise and kind of religion and spectacle. Behind Monkey's deployment of spectacular staging techniques, which included actors displaying extreme acrobatic dexterity or working on wires which enabled them to fly across the stage and above the heads of the audience, set changes on a massive scale, fantastic costumes and stunning animation sequences, I would argue there lies the basic tenets of Buddhist teaching. These tenets can at least partially be summarised thus. All things are composite, and as a corollary of this, all things are transient, and they are inevitably liable to sorrow. This threefold characterization of the nature of the world and all that it contains, sorrowful, transient, and soulless, is frequently repeated in Buddhist literature, and without fully grasping its truth, no being has any chance of salvation. For until he thoroughly understands the three characteristics of the world, a man will inevitably crave for permanence in one form or another, and as this cannot by the nature of things be obtained, he will suffer, and probably make others suffer also. There is, I would argue, an affinity between the reflexive critiques of the shallow nature of postmodernism, simulated culture, and some of the core concepts of Buddhism. In particular, notions of transience and soullessness resonate with both basic Buddhist teachings and the postmodern critique of simulations of popular culture proffered by Gorillaz. Is it possible, therefore, to argue that Monkey is a piece of didactic theatre that seeks to proselytise Buddhism through spectacular postmodern staging techniques? And in the kind of last section, this is what I'm going to analyse. In considering Monkey as a piece of didactic theatre, the arrangement of the performance space at the O2 Arena has perhaps a deeper significance than a simple desire for increased profit. By tapping into popular cultural forms, venues and merchandising techniques, one might argue that the message of the performance reaches a wider audience than if it was, for example, only performed in opera houses by classical musicians. Just as the religious play cycles were taken through towns on carts to engage with the local populace, so Monkey employed mass marketing techniques for the same effect and moved itself to a location of mass entertainment. It could also be argued that the specially built tent at the O2 Arena served to implicate the outside world in the central meaning of the performance, and a need for the audience to critically engage with the Buddhist message of Monkey rather than simply view it as a spectacle. In proposing this reading, I draw upon Michel de Certeau's connection between narrative structures and spatial arrangements, specifically the notion of space as a practiced place. Upon arrival at the Underground station in North Greenwich, the main point of arrival, audience members faced a considerable walk around what's known as Entertainment Avenue, a pathway that travels around 3/4 of the circumference of the O2 Arena and is bordered by a vast array of chain stores and restaurants. Once at the end of Entertainment Avenue, the audience arrived at the performance tent dubbed Monkey's World by the show's creators, which, not at all ironically, fell in the shadow of Canary Wharf, London's financial hub, And in this picture, you can see that the financial centre almost seems to be growing actually out of the tent. Functioning like a stand at the Great Exhibition, inside Monkey's world, audience members could pay for an exotic experience, like, for instance, a Chinese foot massage in a partitioned area complete with beaded doorways and oil lamps, and have a meal in the custom-built Chinese restaurant. Whilst these additional elements are in keeping with the somewhat tongue-in-cheek style of the performance, they also point towards the liminal nature of the event itself. Audience members were orientated towards the aesthetic of the performance by establishing a world in which signifiers of China were in abundance. Yet the foot massage parlour and the long walk to the tent also encouraged reflection on the meaning of the journey in Monkey Journey to the West. Not only did audiences have to make a significant journey to the performance space and then rest and literally have their feet revived, but Monkey then expected them to absorb a piece of theatre which contemplates the journey of a monkey from a base creature to an enlightened being that is aware of itself and its place in cosmology. It was not without purpose that the tickets for the O2 event gave 2 times for the audiences, a journey start time for when the tent opened its doors, and a show start time for the performance. And indeed, I remember receiving an email from the show kind of organisers that people were getting very confused when the ticket said 7:45 and they turned up at 2:45 at the tent expecting something to happen. The space asked the audience to travel past a bewildering array of commercial chain stores, then take a break from daily life to consider preparing themselves for a journey, to immerse themselves in a world which was tenuously separated but connected to the outside world, and then question their position in it by watching a piece of spectacular didactic theatre. In a similar way to the novel, Monkey narrates the journey of its protagonists as a means to engage its audience in the contemplation of the constructed nature of existence and the need for self-renewal. This theme is a recurring motif in the original 16th century novel, as Anthony Yu, the translator of the best kind of version of Journey to the West in English, put in his introduction, and I quote, "In accordance with folk Taoism, the emphasis of the novel is on integration. To all 4 of his imprisoned followers, Tripitaka offers the opportunity of finding renewal and release through the subordination of their selves to the selfhood of the pilgrimage." End quote. Thus, both the novel and the performance reference moments of awakening and enlightenment. For example, despite being the most venerable and holy character in the novel, the priest often is unable to perceive reality as it really is, and he frequently makes mistakes because of his own short-sightedness. A particularly famous chapter, which was also included in the production, describes how a white-boned demon disguises itself first as a girl, then a woman, and then an elderly man in order to get close to the priest, because this demon wants to eat the priest's flesh because it will make the demon immortal. In each case, Monkey sees through the disguise and he attacks the demon. The priest, incensed by what he considers to be Monkey's poor judgment, banishes him, but only when the priest falls into the demon's trap does he realise he made a mistake, and he summons Monkey back to his rescue. In Chinese, Monkey's name is Sun Wukong, which means monkey awake to vacuity, suggesting his awareness of the emptiness of all things. Whilst the use of circus acts at first seems cliched, in actual fact, these elements serve to highlight how the control of the physical is connected to mental enlightenment. Across the production, acrobats and circus performers portray Buddhist immortals, arhats, and heavenly beings. Whilst a row of celestial beings teetering on unicycles might strike the audience as faintly comic at first, it nevertheless points to a connection between spirituality and mental and physical control. The physical performance of the cast reach a spectacular climax when the characters enter nirvana at the end of the opera. The scene opens with martial artists performing movements of extreme dexterity, including one acrobat who stands on his head by balancing on top of the other, on top of the head of another acrobat, and this picture is on the left. The production closes with a routine of plate spinners who perform gymnastic moves by balancing more than 20 spinning plates in the air. Despite the incongruity of finding plate spinners in Nirvana, though I have to say I haven't been to Nirvana, so that's a supposition, the point being made is serious. Balance and harmony are figuratively expressed in the delicate spinning of a plate. I would argue that in classifying Monkey as a piece of didactic theatre, the artistic choices made by the production team take on a greater coherence. In a performance exploring issues of perception, a postmodern theatre aesthetic becomes a productive tool in which to question reality, not least because it can be seen to loosely parallel some of the central tenets of Buddhism that I've described. Indeed, it can be argued that the decision to stage the performance in a tent next to the O2 arena is both a commercial decision and an ideological one. Kershaw, the critic I noted earlier, suggests that radically political performance has been pursued in self-created circumstances, in fresh types of venue, beyond existing theatre. And whilst it is true that the successive waves of performance experiment has led to some institutionalisation, that should simply make us more alert to the significance of the continuing effort to sidestep the disciplinary structures represented by the physical and social architecture of theatre buildings. Yet, in citing Kershaw, any perceived spatial radicalism in Monkey is also shown wanting. For although there is evidence that the production explores cultural citations through a myriad of performance styles, and I note with interest that the performance has been labelled circus opera, and to critique contemporary life through postmodern reflexivity, the performance was also staged, for the most part, in traditional theatres. Even the circus tent at the O2 was arranged with raked seating in rows facing the stage, thereby denying the audience any semblance of spatial freedom. Of course, space is not the only factor in rendering a performance political, and it's equally possible that a performance operating through the dominant commercial mode may still seek to reflexively criticise its own mode of operation. The traditional format of the raked seating in rows forced the audience to concentrate their attention on the stage, which could be seen as relevant to an example of didactic theatre. That Monkey took place in a specially constructed tent next to the O2 arena, itself a large tent-like structure modelled out of stretched fabric, can be read as both a commercial and logistical decision, but also as a space that mirrors and implicitly critiques the commercial simulations that take place there. So, to conclude, it could be argued that the contemplation of spirituality in Monkey is indicative of the well-worn Orientalist path that British theatre has followed. Indeed, following Monkey's opening night in Manchester, one critic commented, and I quote, "From a position of ignorance, it's difficult to judge whether Alban has written a Westerner's insulting pastiche of Chinese music, a pitfall of which James Hewlett has admitted he was wary, or accurately nailed it. Similarly, it's difficult to know whether the visual clichés of China, paper lanterns and willow-patterned backdrops, are lazy, or clichés because they're genuinely iconic cultural touchstones." It's interesting to note that Chen Shizheng, who has actually brought the whole project together, is actually hardly ever discussed in relation to critics' analysis of the performance. This is an Alban and Hewlett production. The representation of spiritual China in the West through feng shui, tai chi, Taoist principles of yin and yang and so on does indeed promote the Orientalist notion that China remains a primarily esoteric culture that favours notion of antiquity over modernity. In this light, Monkey is little more than a piece of exotic chinoiserie grounded in reductive notions of Chineseness. We live, of course, in a world of commodities, wrote Said, but also of representation. Their production, circulation, history and interpretation are the very element of culture. And with its broad selection of merchandise, Monkey can certainly be regarded as a self-commodifying example of Orientalist culture, which utilises the profit-driven economy of popular culture to represent China as spiritual, anti-modern, and as a result, technologically inferior. Yet the postmodern approach that the production takes, particularly in relation to the way in which it reflexively commodifies itself, renders this Orientalist reading simplistic and problematic. For example, the decision to offer souvenir tea bags for sale at performance was reductive and Orientalist because it's a stereotype of China. Yet the very notion of a souvenir tea bag is clearly tongue-in-cheek. That the souvenirs are an ironic take on what a souvenir of Chineseness can be suggests that the production was aware of identity politics and the spiritual anti-modern view of China that the production proposed was insincere. Indeed, that Monkey transcends stereotypes is not a straightforward argument to make. For some members of the audience, and I would include myself in the first viewing, it is possible that a narrow transnational signifiers of Chineseness in the production confirms a limited and stereotypical view of China as spiritual. these readings are difficult to wholly dismiss, as is the charge that Monkey is little more than a commercial spectacle. Yet it remains possible that the postmodern aesthetics of a production may at once appear to endorse the status quo, whilst also seeking to undermine it. This can be read in a denaturalised and overtly fantasised cartoon-like setting of the production, which cannot represent a real Chinese identity, for the existence of such is surely denied by postmodernism. The contradictory and in many ways irreconcilable relationship between postmodernism and Buddhism that is encompassed by the production calls all grand narratives, including identity, into question. Monkey suggests, rightly or wrongly, that something significant exists beyond everyday modernity, and through an inherently deconstructed Buddhism which probes for spiritual renewal and the desire to move beyond a constructed postmodern reality, it might just be found. Thank you very much.